and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Wadhwani Viewpoint podcast. The United Nations has commemorated June 27th as the International MSME Day. And what better occasion to kick off the podcast than by celebrating the sector that is a backbone of emerging economies around the world, including India, of course. The sector employs over 11 crore people in India, contributes to almost 27% of the GDP and 40% of the total exports. My name is Manali Shah, and today we have with us Mr. Samir Sathe, the Executive Vice President of the Wadhwani Advantage program by the Wadhwani Foundation. He has over 30 years of experience in change management, and he's a Master of Change from the Onsard College in France. Samir, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, Manali, and it's a fascinating topic and so dear to my heart.
Absolutely. So why don't we start off by talking a little bit about the Advantage program and the MSME ecosystem in India today?
Sure. So Wadhwani Advantage program is truly a pioneering one. It's quite unique in its sense. We are trying to productize the consulting services, but in a manner which is very unique. For example, what we are trying to do is to accelerate the economic progress of small and medium-sized enterprises. So we have kind of three tracks. The first track is what we call DIY, do-it-yourself track, which is meant for smaller SMEs in the range of rupees 5 crores to 75 crores revenue. And there we basically help them undergo an online diagnostic tool, followed with a 15-hour help desk support to understand the problems and to help them basically look at accelerating their growth by connecting them with the right curated advisors and having them access the huge knowledge resources that we have. The second track is what we call Focus Program. Focus Program is meant for little larger SMEs, the mid-sized enterprises, which are above 75 crores. And there we help them in a structured journey of diagnosis and transformation for a year and 2 years with the help of Wadhwani Foundation doing the PMO, Program Management Office support. The external curated advisors who are experts in different domains actually helping the SMEs in identifying the growth impediments and helping them in actually implementing the recommendations. Most importantly, we have a community platform, which is the third track, which allows them to access hundreds of knowledge resources, the frameworks, the tools, the videos, etc., through which they can gain knowledge and through which they can also access the curated advisors. And very importantly, we also now have recently announced a subsidy of the fees that the SMEs will incur on advisors. As you know, SMEs do not have the luxury of having huge cash reserves, and they need to pay the right advisors so that they get the right support in their journey. So we, as a foundation, we are very glad to announce that we have now provided the subsidy to the SMEs so that they can bear some costs of the consulting fees by these advisors. So this is a unique program that we've established since 2019. And in last 3 years, we have helped hundreds of SMEs. Last year, we helped about 100 SMEs with a net promoter score of 73. So I'm very glad that we are talking about a very important subject as far as SMEs are concerned.
That's wonderful. It's great to see SMEs in India receive this kind of support, which is very much needed in the current scenario and at any given point of time. So that's great to know. It leads me to my next question. How can we catalyze the SME ecosystem in India?
That's an important question, Manali. I think whenever one deals with the subject of SME ecosystem, one is dealing with different constituents and different stakeholders. Now, as you know, as in life and even in business, the different entities have got different agendas. They have got different aspirations. They have got different motives. They have got different dreams, right? So the SME, which may want to grow twofold, threefold, fivefold in X number of years, may be looking at a certain kind of customers, certain kind of products, certain kind of geographies. Now, if it doesn't receive the support, a similar support from other constituents, their customers, their suppliers, their partners, or funding agencies, or government, then we are dealing with a very tough situation. Now, when one thinks about SME ecosystem, one has to think about all these constituents, right? You have a value chain, you have different components of the value chain, and everybody's interest must be aligned so that we are able to build the SME ecosystem. So it's not enough for SMEs to think about only their interests and result in a situation which is a win-lose. And at the same time, the larger corporates can't think about only their interests and not think about the smaller SMEs. And in either case, you will have a situation wherein some parts of the ecosystem will grow, some part of the ecosystem will not grow, which is what India is frankly going through.
Right. That's a very, very pertinent perspective. I think it's very important for the different stakeholders in the ecosystem to come together so that the sector grows and scales up. Yes, absolutely. So my next question is about scaling up. MSMEs often have problems accessing funding through formal credit institutions such as banks. Now, what can be done in this regard?
I think there are three fundamental problems, Manali. One is that the solid case for acceleration of growth is simply not there. In India, we have lots of small and medium-sized enterprises who have been around for 25, 30 years, first generation, second generation, and their sales and revenues are merely 10 crores, 20 crores, 30 crores, right? I think there needs to be a sense of ambition, a justified ambition, well-informed ambition to grow much faster. So fundamentally, that's a big driver. And SMEs, a lot of times, it becomes a lifestyle business for many SME owners. When they have a BMW car, they have a big bungalow, they are earning enough. They don't feel as inspired to grow 10 times and 20 times, which is not the case in developed countries, right? You would have a different sort of ambition level. So that's the first thing. Second is really when it comes to business case for funding, often this lack of ambition and acceleration results in basically preparing a poor business case for any lender or any investor to be deeply interested about. See, at the end of the day, what is lender looking at? What is investor looking at? To expand the balance sheet, and secondly, to improve the quality of the balance sheet, right? Now, if they don't get either, then it's a problem. So a lot of times what happens is that they are not able to give the money to these SMEs because there is not enough business case so that the money will be repaid correctly, right? Because their business models are fractured, their business plans are not clear, their ambition to grow is not well supported by the market evidence. So naturally, a lender or an investor is going to be reluctant to invest in or lend money to such a company. Correct. So firstly, that is that's a quality is a problem. Quality of the business case is a problem. And secondly, we have a dichotomy in India wherein there is a need for $600 billion of deficit, which is needed to fund the SMEs growth. But if you look at the supply side, it's not that the money is not there, the money is there. But the takers need to be solid enough and good enough. So I think that needs to be done. The second problem in funding is that often the banks are caught up in their own algorithms in terms of funding cycles and funding assumptions. With COVID and a lot of the other external factors, a lot of these assumptions have changed, right? So when one is lending money and one is investing money, one needs to relook at those assumptions and pick up a lens which is a combination of what is required to fund like a startup, right? I mean, the lens that you would look at a startup and the lens that you would look at an SME is very different. So there is a need to redefine some of the assumptions behind which one starts looking at funding an SME. And thirdly, very importantly, which is the point related to the first question that we discussed, is that there has to be the risk assessment at the ecosystem level, at the cluster level, as opposed to only a unit level. Often, the community-based improvement is a very solid reason why the money should be lent to that customer, lent to that industry, lent to that subsegment, which is very different from one-on-one lending or one-on-one investment paradigm that we have had in so many years in the past. So I think some of these factors need to change. And finally, I would say, from the funding perspective, there has to be a very strict discipline in terms of doing a program management office to know whether the outcomes are realized and whether the SMEs and their ecosystem players, the advisors, the mentors, the other players, the partners, for example, are truly giving justice to the money that needs to be invested and are getting sufficient returns out of it. So these are the host of factors that need to be looked at.
Wonderful. While we're talking about the changes that are needed, let's talk about women's participation in the sector. How can we boost the participation, whether as owners or as employees?
It is interesting that you bring this up, because if you look at the research, empirical evidence globally, wherever women have participated, these enterprises have actually performed better than most of the other enterprises. And it's most often these facts are overlooked, unfortunately. Even today, when it comes to investment decisions or lending decisions, or when it comes to looking at scaling up operations, said unsaid, some of the biases are still there, even today.
Right.
And that's unfortunate, right? So when one wants to increase the women participation, one has to look at simply the data. So firstly, they are better performing. Secondly, we have found that the longevity of the women-owned businesses, actually, they are more stable. So if you look at the history of businesses in 1950s and 60s and 70s, the average lifespan of an enterprise was over 70 years. Today, it is 13 years, only 13.
Oh.
What that means is that the longevity of the organizations is in trouble. Most of these organizations are owned by men. If you look at the data and look at the same kind of data for women-owned enterprises, they are very far and few. But those women-owned enterprises have sustained better because there is a better stability at the management level. Women, I believe, are able to balance both logic and emotions very well. And I believe that women will be able to look at development of the talent very well, which is an incredibly important ingredient for success, right? So I think to increase the women participation, there are 3-4 things that need to be done. One is that we must actively encourage investments in women-owned enterprises. Second, we must actively encourage mass entrepreneurship in women, and that's how you will have inclusive growth in India. Third, we must encourage, for the time being, to look at a little more subsidized environment when one is looking at promoting women-owned businesses or wherever there are women as beneficiaries. Because once you have that gender equity, not necessarily in terms of looking at overlooking the merit, but considering the merit and ensuring that there is a gender equity in making sure that these their businesses are promoted, will go a long way in the long run, right? It's very, very important. And I think finally it boils down to changing the gender attitudes in the adolescent age. One of the companies where I'm a board member at, it's a startup which basically changes the gender attitudes in adolescent ages, right? And we have found a significant correlation of that to the occupation and the professions that the women take later in their life, and even how men look at women later in their life, right? So these are all incredibly important topics, whether it is a workforce participation, that means being an employee, or it could be actually being an entrepreneur. Either way you look at it, I think women participation must increase.
Absolutely agreed. I hope these data points that you've shared changes some people's mindsets, and we see that kind of positive change in the Indian ecosystem. Now, let's go global a little bit.
Sure.
How can we boost the participation of Indian SMEs in the global value chain?
One clear indication is that you must have seen in the past 2 years, the Indian exports have really grown very well. And I think what India and globe witnessed, in fact, I would say global market witnessed much more, was quite a different scenario than what we witnessed in early 2000s and 90s and 80s, wherein a lot of the nations, a lot of the countries started becoming focused more inward as opposed to integrating more with the world. And that's an interesting trend because until 15-20 years ago, we were saying that the world is becoming smaller. Everybody is interested in sort of having a free trade, ensuring that there is a free movement of goods, money, and talent. But in the last 2-3 years, we observe that a lot of the nations are actually looking at inward interests and their own interests. US, China, great example. Look at Asia. There are multiple examples wherein every nation is looking at their own interests. You look at Europe, it's a classic example today. The recent issue that happened between Russia and Ukraine. I mean, you take multiple examples. Every nation is trying to look at protecting their own interests as opposed to helping the world, right? And you will see that. And that puts a big question on how SMEs can or cannot leverage what is out there, right? So whether it is a market-seeking entry, which means you want to grow your business, or whether it is a resource-seeking entry, which means you want to set up some manufacturing plant or you want to set up a supply base elsewhere, one has to look at the politics, economics, and business together, not in isolation. And I think that's one of the most fundamental changes that the policymakers must think about, the economists must think about, the business people must think about. So I think a greater alignment between the objectives of these three different entities that I talked about, politicians, economists, and business people, is a must when you want to look at ecosystem, basically SME ecosystems in different countries talking to each other. And I think that will increase the trade, that will increase the business relations, that will improve the competitive advantage of different countries, because then one is starting to think about a cluster, a trade corridor, and a particular region as a lens, as opposed to only, let's say, only domestic market or only regional market or only local market. I think that needs to be changed. And finally, this entire framework and lens needs to be instilled deeply in the minds of the entrepreneurs and the business people. Because today, everybody is thinking about growing from X to Y. They're not thinking about a global vision. And that goes back to my earlier point in terms of to what is the extent of their vision? What is the expanse of their, what they want to do in life as entrepreneurs. So I think these are all different factors that need to come together to be able to make sure globally SME ecosystems and in India, Indian ecosystems thrive.
Right. And when we talk about going global, we cannot miss but talk about digital transformation and the value that it adds to MSMEs. Now, given your experience in interacting with Indian SMEs, what has been your experience? How do they view it, and how can they actually approach it and make baby steps to incorporate the digital tools in their business?
Yeah, that's a great question. And digital transformation has been in the news, in the talks, in the chats like this, in the podcasts like this a lot. And I think this is a very important topic. In my experience, digital transformation has been talked about, but there is a knowledge deficit. When I interact with the SME entrepreneurs, they know about this. They know that they need to do this. They know that there are things that need to be achieved with digital transformation, because you're collapsing the cycle time. You're able to interact with overseas investors anywhere. The location becomes irrelevant in many ways. And then it becomes a very important low-cost channel to be able to expand your business. It has also got implications internally, how you interact with employees, how you interact with your partners, and digital enablement will go a long way. So they do understand the importance. I think I haven't found the issue in terms of understanding the importance. But the challenges are threefold. First is that they understand that it's going to be transparent. Whenever you go digital, it becomes transparent. And there is a natural tendency to think about, oh my God, everything that I have will be now revealed to the external world. And unfortunately, there is a lot of incidents of still what is hidden, right? And that needs to change. That will allow the SMEs to become more transparent, right? So for example, we have 63 to 70 million SMEs in India, MSMEs in India. Why is it that there is only 12.5 or 13 or 14 million which are GSTN? Why? Right? Why is it that the rest of the SMEs they're data poor, right? So therefore, you're dealing with the challenge of transparency. You're dealing with the challenge of not having good quality of data, and that acts as a fundamental issue for digital transformation. Because even if you go digital, if your input and data is incorrect or not authentic, it doesn't matter. Actually, you will multiply that problem, amplify the problem, right? Because it's garbage in, garbage out, right? So that's the second one. And the last one is what I have found is that enough understanding of what does it take to implement digital transformation, the cost, the advisors, the experts. I think one doesn't know how to go about doing it, right? So there is a deficit in terms of the right kind of mentorship that needs to be given to the SMEs. So I think these are the host of factors which act as obstacles for digital transformation. I'm not going to talk too much about the benefits, because I think they are very well known in terms of what would it do to the businesses. But I think these are the challenges that need to be overcome.
And I think we can hope for those challenges to be overcome with the support of the Wadhwani Advantage program. I'm sure that the journey will be a lot easier. When we talk about transformation, we also need to talk about skilling. What value does skilling add in enhancing the competitiveness of Indian SMEs?
Yeah, I mean, skilling is a massive subject, and skilling is valid at the entry level. We have our other program, Wadhwani Opportunity, that does that. What we do is we skill the entrepreneurs, right, as a part of the Advantage program, because I think one of the most important factors about the Advantage program is it just doesn't stop at solving the problem or creating an opportunity for the SMEs to accelerate their growth, but it empowers them with the management capabilities to accelerate the growth, right? So when we're talking digital transformation, change management, how to think, how to make decisions using data, how to program manage, right? So there are all the different skills which are needed, and skilling is absolutely essential. I would say I'd written an article in one of the international publications on why is it important to look at giving skilling support to the entrepreneurs, right? We could have a situation wherein about 20 to 25% of the SMEs could be out of business if they don't reskill. And we're talking about a massive impact, right? And these skills are not necessarily domain skills. They're also the soft skills, cognitive skills, interaction skills. And I think there is a massive need to really urgently treat this, right? And in fact, I would recommend that all the policymakers and all of us should really set aside a fund at the national level to be able to make sure that the skilling is really well funded and we skill each and every entrepreneur on the ground, because only then you will have a system-wide impact.
I couldn't agree more with you, Samir. So lastly, let's talk about how SMEs can reach out to you and your team. How can they be a part of the wonderful Wadhwani Advantage program?
Absolutely. I mean, we talked about digital transformation. It's pretty easy. Go and type in the Google with Wadhwani Advantage and you will find our homepage out there. It's self-explanatory out there. That's the easiest way to go and register yourself and apply for this program. Those enterprises which are above 75 crores of revenue can register as a focus in our focus track, which is a high-touch model, and we will make sure that we handhold you until the outcomes are delivered. The second track is the DIY track, which I explained for the smaller organizations. They can register themselves on that program also. And we are now coming up with a state-of-the-art community platform, which allows them to access the information, access the curated advisors, the customers, the peers, and interact with them, hold events, actually make sure that there is a very rich connectivity that happens on that platform. So if you go there and actually register yourself, we will reach out to you and then you will be a part of our community, right? So it's very simple, and then go there and do that. The second is just write to us. My email ID is out there. And then you can write to us, and and then we'll reach out to you once again. So I think these are the simple ways. It's not a rocket science. I think people, the SMEs are invited to reach us as soon as possible, because we want to make a system-wide impact as soon as possible.
Thanks for that wonderful, very insightful chat, Samir. It was great having you on the show. And thank you to everyone who's tuned into this episode of the Wadhwani Viewpoint podcast. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.